It's the Franciscan priest and mystic Richard Rohr who says that pain that is not transformed is transmitted. I think most of us, all of us, know about transmitted pain. We know that people who abuse children were overwhelmingly abused themselves. As children, we know that if something unfair has happened to us, sometimes when we have more power, we do the same unfair thing to another person, and that seems fair to us to do that. And looking on the world stage, there is no shortage of examples of transmitted pain. Kent Hoffman, his area of study is vital parenting, what really resilient children looks like. And I remember Kent saying of a well-known world leader, I guarantee you that within this man, there is a little boy who is desperately afraid that he is unlovable. So, many people transmit pain. And some people figure out how to transform it. And I want to suggest to you that the great mystery of my father's life was figuring out how to transform his pain. Dad was born in 1925, just outside of Hamburg, and, oh, am I gone? Well, I'll just have to speak up a little bit. He's born in 1925, just outside of Hamburg, and so this is 4 years before the stock market crash and the Great Depression. It is 8 years before the Reichstag fire and the collapse of democracy in Germany. It's 14 years before the soldiers and the tanks roll into Poland. I'm conscious there's a historian here, so I'm hoping I'm getting these dates right. In 1943, Dad reaches the age of majority, comes of age, and he is enlisted in the Army. He has strategically volunteered for the Air Force because he believes that by refueling and otherwise working on planes, he is least likely to encounter any violence. And he spends the remainder of the war trying to studiously avoid violence, trying not to kill anyone and trying not to be killed. And notwithstanding his best efforts, Dad encounters what today we would call trauma. On one occasion, so the wheels completely fall off the German army as the 40s wear on, and even though he's in the Air Force, he's enlisted to be a foot soldier. On one occasion, he is at a train station, and one train station away, partisans ambush and kill the soldiers, his fellow soldiers, and the bodies lay beside the tracks. In 1945, he and his fellow soldiers are famished. So they leave their guns and go out walking, looking for food in the neighborhood in France. A group of British soldiers surface out of the rubble and point guns at them. They put their hands up, and that is the end of Dad's military career. He becomes a prisoner of war in Scotland. There he works as a laborer on farms. He meets Scottish people who tell him they are very glad that the war is over, but they are sorry that Hitler didn't finish killing all the Jews. And then he returns to Germany, to economic privation. So we talk about the post-war economic miracle in Germany, but it really doesn't kick in until well into the 50s. And in I hope I'm right in saying this, Peter, 1947 is when Dad returns to Hamburg. There's so many men coming back to so few jobs, and this privation is what inspires him, is that the right word, to move to Canada in 1953, essentially penniless. Hanging over all of this is my grandfather, my dad's dad. My grandfather is embittered by his experience in World War He is in an almost impossibly unhappy marriage to my grandmother. The stuff of legends, the misery between them. And he is what people mean when they use the expression petty tyrant. My grandfather, Dad grows up in a home full of cross-examination, rages, beatings, his father coming home drunk. And well, we could imagine, with that history, we could imagine Dad transmitting pain. But he didn't. When Dad died at the age of 97, a very nearly biblical age, I shared the news, as one does these days, via Facebook and other media, and one person after another said things like, Frank Elfert was so kind, or he was so gentle, or he always treated me like an equal. My friend Norman simply said he was a nice guy. And what I want to emphasize, and those of you who knew Frank Elfert will know this, is nobody was damning him with faint praise. These were just the best words we had available to us to talk about the gentleness that he brought into the world. I never was afraid of my father. I don't know what heaven is like, but I imagine it is something like being in bed and my father coming to my bedside and reading to me from Treasure Island. I would be okay with eternity looking like that. Now, how did he do it? How did he transform his pain when he so easily might have transmitted? I have a few wonderings for you. It's not a comprehensive list. It couldn't be. One of the ways I think he transformed his pain is the stories that he chose to tell about reality. He chose to tell a story in which, generally speaking, people are trying their best. They're doing the best they can. Those of you who know Brene Brown may recognize that particular story. And he realized that frequently in life, there was a choice between finding a situation tragic or infuriating or funny. And Dad frequently chose to find situations that went not according to script. He frequently chose to find them funny. After he got out of the army and got to Canada, he had multiple careers. He was a railroader. He was a postie. Almost incredibly, he was an insurance salesman. Dad was every inch not a salesman. So this is a simply bizarre and short-lived career. And then in the backside of the 60s, I just found the receipts. He went back to school and became a social worker. And he worked particularly closely with children in distress and their families, and my sense is this was a vocation that he was called to. He had the opportunity to give children the kind of love and safety and respect that he had not received himself as a child. One of Dad's favorite clients. Now, as a social worker, you're probably not supposed to have favorite clients, but Dad stopped being a social worker in 1985, and I'm hoping his manager has also retired by this point, so the word may not get back to him. One of Dad's favorite clients was a young man who was a rascal. He was constantly getting up to some new shenanigan, and one of my favorite stories he told of this young guy. So this is a story that the young man was staying in a group home, and this is a story that the group home leader told to Dad, which he in turn told to me and Mom 40 years ago. So I'm the very definition of an unreliable narrator here. This may have shifted a little in memory, but the story as I remember it goes that one day in the group home, the calm of the home was interrupted by the sound of bells. And this young man Dad's client, who never spoke up, said, "Oh, the bells are coming from outside." And immediately the group home leader knew something was off. This is just not the sort of thing this child would volunteer. And so they followed the sound of the bells through the group home up to the attic. They went in the attic where they found all of these boxes. And it turned out the young man and his friends had robbed Eaton's department store. And they had brought home boxes full of alarm clocks, which were now going off. And Dad told this story and laughed so hard. I don't know if you were ever with him when something set him off in that way. I lived for getting my father to laugh in that way, high-pitched, out of control, sometimes lasting for over a minute of laughter. And he would laugh like that. Right, he had a choice to tell a story. He could have said, "This is a contemptible young man. He's making all these awful choices." He decided he was doing the best that he could, and he decided, an attic full of Eaton alarm clock. That's funny. You might as well just decide that it is, and your blood pressure is going to be so much better if you do. When we buried Dad back in January, so Travis and I made a casket for him. Thank you, Travis. It's a deeply meaningful thing to get to do. And when we got to the cemetery, the funeral home had put, I've shared this with a number of you, had put the lid of the casket on either upside down or backwards or both. And the upshot was that it was dowel construction, if that makes any sense. You couldn't get it together without a huge hammer, a huge swing of a hammer. And it was an immensely fitting mistake. Dad was very much belonged to the good enough school of carpentry, and it was fitting. And I shared that with a number of folks. And my friend Jenny said to me, "I'm amazed you can find this funny. So many people would be so angry about this." And I thought, oh my God, this is a lesson from Frank Elfert here at his graveside. Like, you're allowed to find a backwards coffin lid funny rather than infuriating. I think that's part of how he was able to transform his pain. Choosing a story in which folks, including funeral directors, are doing their best, and deciding when you got a choice between tragic and funny, you can choose funny. Dad was transformed as well. His transformation as well flowed out of love. So he and Mom, in one of the holy coincidences that make up our lives, meet in 1958 in, for goodness sakes, Prince Albert, of course it is. Of course it is. Just thank you for saving me.
Canada's Crossroads.
They meet as one does in Canada's Crossroads, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Neither of them know really the people getting married, but they're there anyway, and they get married 11 years later in 1969. In the 50s, going into the 60s, this is a long courtship. By the standards of those days, but I think Dad needed those 11 years to decide that the legacy of his parents' marriage did not have to be one that he took on himself. And having said yes to love, Dad said yes to it absolutely. Folks who visited my folks, it's an awkward sentence, people who visited my parents later on in their lives and stayed overnight would often comment on how the morning started at my folks' house. Mom was usually up before Dad and making coffee, and Dad would appear in his dressing gown. And the routine, I'm not exactly sure what the sort of subtext was, but the routine was sort of that they were meeting for the first time in the kitchen, and Dad would say to Mom, "Hello, young woman." and they would share this protracted embrace. This is transformed pain. One more thing I wonder about, and it's what we're celebrating today, is that the right word, is music. Dad found transformation in music. He was deeply allergic to church. It's maybe ironic that I got the job I did. But he could come into a church and listen to and love a Bach Mass, Pergolesi, Stabat Mater, When the Saints Go Marching In. These are things that he could adore. Insofar as the language of sacred or holy made sense to him, it made sense within the context of music. In the church, we say that an occasion like this is about resurrection. So resurrection being this mystery that Jesus participates in 2,000 years ago, and resurrection being this mystery that Dad is participating in now. But it's a third thing as well. Resurrection is something that you and I are invited to be part of right now. The poet Wendell Berry closes one of his poems with the words, "Practice resurrection." Resurrection is something you can do. If that's right, I wonder, as we remember Dad and say thanks for his life and grieve him and sing him home, I wonder how you and I might be called to practice resurrection. How you and I might be called to transform pain rather than transmitting it. It seems to me the transformation of pain sitting at the very core of what we mean by resurrection. Maybe we can choose to tell a story in which people are doing the best they can, in which when we have a choice between something being tragic and something being funny, we can choose funny. Maybe we can say yes to love and see how that changes us. Maybe we can find beauty in places like music. We might change the world a little bit if we do that. And we might change ourselves. There's that expression, isn't it? That virtue is its own reward. And I think Dad gave a gift to a lot of people, certainly to me, through his choice to transform pain. But he also gave this gift to himself in deciding that he didn't have to be his father. He didn't have to participate in the violence that he'd witnessed as a young person. He got to live this amazing life. In deciding not to be his father, he got to decide to be Frank Elfert. And what could be better than that?